Good morning.
Thanks for being with us today. This is, of course, Cracking the Restaurant Labor Crunch, and our goal is to help operators find solutions to the labor crisis challenge. With me today, Mr. Juan Higueros, and he is from a company called Bear Robotics. He is the Chief Operating Officer. Welcome to the show today, Juan. Thanks for being with us.
Roger, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to get a chance to talk to you about what's happening in the restaurant industry these days.
Well, it's interesting because, you and I were just talking about opportunity, and I actually came across your company at San Antonio at Performance Foods Service show there. And I just saw this really unique robot. We're going to talk all about the Survey robot. But before we do, tell us a little bit about Bear Robotics. You're the co-founder as well as the chief operating officer. So tell us, how old is your company? What was the brainchild for it? And tell us what you do.
Very good question. The company was started in May of 2017, so we're still somewhat considered to be babies in this industry. But we actually started the company by owning a restaurant ourselves, believe it or not. Our CEO, who's one of our other co-founders, his name is John Hall. He actually, while he was working away at Google, decided to enter the lion's den and actually buy a restaurant himself. With that came understanding that it is insanely difficult to run a restaurant, just one. And so, he bought a Korean restaurant over in Milpitas, California, back in around 2016, so prior to this company actually being started. And so he came up with the concept of really, how can we actually improve what each server is actually doing each day? Because there's the thought process back then was really, there's got to be a much more efficient way to allow our servers in our own restaurant to really focus much more time on spending more time on the front of the house, rather than in a Korean restaurant, you have many, many side dishes and even having to go into the back of the house, sometimes hundreds of times a day. So this is kind of the inception of how Bear Robotics was created, to be honest with you, because in our early days, we had a very live lab, real-time lab to work with on early prototypes. And so we joke that our early team members probably logged the Guinness World of Record in terms of programming a robot in a real-time restaurant, because that's essentially what we're doing with our early prototypes. But that's how the inception of the company actually happened. And here we are, nearly 4.5 years later, about to deploy these all over the United States.
Well, they say timing is divine, and the pandemic has absolutely devastated our industry. And then just when you think the pandemic is over, for the past year or so, the labor crunch has really hit us really hard. So it's like operators have been beaten up really, really badly. And now it's about, what can we do if you're still standing as an operator, if you've gone through all the worst of it and you're still open and you're doing the best you can. Now's the time to really dig deep, rediscover, the passion, why you got into this industry in the first place, because brighter days are ahead. So before we get into the Survey robot, which really intrigues me, let's talk a little bit about, some of your customers or clients, other restaurants. This company was started by starting a restaurant, which is very similar to my story 26 years ago. But let's talk a little bit about any best practices or advice that you might have for operators on other things that they can do to save labor, to find new sources of labor, besides bonuses and incentives that go without saying. We've talked a lot about that. Any unique ways of finding new people, or, keeping the good people you have happy? Any of those things would be important, one.
Yeah, it's interesting because these days, the jury's kind of still out in terms of whether or not some of the workers that actually left the industry over the last 18 months, whether they'll be coming back. And so the existing restaurant owners, especially the folks that we are working with today, and we're deployed in probably over 20 states at this point, but we want to be in all 52 within the next 6 months, or all 50 states within the next 6 months. But I think, I think realistically, the existing staff that's actually on hand right now is really they're just physically exhausted.
You're right. Absolutely true.
A lot of folks are either, you hear a lot about the open roles that are going unfilled at this point. And so, I don't know whether it's low wages that have kept folks from coming back, or perhaps it's the Delta variant that actually has kept people just from coming back in droves. However, the folks that are actually working, they're working 2 shifts a day. It's a physically grinding nature of work that you actually have to really go through, and so it requires a lot of running around. And I think a lot of what we've seen lately, in addition to that, is the high stress, meaning the high stress that's coming actually from customers, because
Thank you.
the existing staff that's actually on site right now is they're being asked to. So if a restaurant is actually underserved by 30% of its staff, that means the existing staff are actually having to cover that ground. And so, I mean, some folks that I don't know if when they left the industry, whether they may have found something that will be more desirable for their lifestyle, but the restaurants across the country that we're actually seeing now, realistically, are trying to figure out and get creative in terms of how they help their staff. And so that's, we want to try to the tool that we're providing is to really try to help the small and medium sized businesses, as well as even big chains are really getting creative in terms of how they can actually help the existing staff really kind of be a lot more efficient with what they're doing in terms of what they're doing day to day, and not having to carry their load.
Thanks so much for pointing that out. You're absolutely correct because the news headlines really talk about crazy people in the air on airline flights that are causing all sorts of disruptions because of masks, because of no masks, because of,
Right.
poor service, because of crowded conditions. People are back on airplanes in record numbers. People are back in restaurants in record numbers. And the same thing is happening in the hospitality industry. Restaurants are, like you say, they're underserving their customers because they're short staffed. Customers have certain expectations because they're paying higher prices in many cases because of rising food costs and everything else, but they're getting less than superior service, and they're taking it out on the staff that are, like you said, are working double shifts. They're absolute at their wits end. So it's really been a perfect storm of chaos out there. And now it's like, how do we get back to normal? Because none of this is sustainable. Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. I mean, it's interesting to see that our overall mission is really to help people. I mean, in the end, I mean the people of, whether it's small and medium sized businesses, and most people don't realize that the restaurant industry, the large majority of it is actually small and medium sized
It
businesses. You
is.
always hear
Right.
about the big chains. The big chains get the big kind of, the pizzazz, or kind of the big name recognition. But most of the restaurant industry is made up of small business owners, whether you have a small mom and pop that has one, two, or three restaurants, or even, it's always surprising to me, and I always I'm just when I look at folks that have been able to grow from one or two or three restaurants to 20, it's so remarkable to see that, because it's so difficult. But you have to be major kudos to those restaurant owners that are able to do that. But in the end, our mission was really to try to help continue to serve and help people, because realistically, what you want to do in the end, regardless of who you are, you want to help provide, like you mentioned, that best service that you can. And so what we're trying to do is really how to automate those back-breaking tasks that people hate to do anyway, whether it's running back and forth and things like that, because in the end, hopefully that will become a better overall culture for our restaurant staff, and really kind of help maintain people with you, because as you know, the turnover can be just significantly high, and it always has been that way. So
For
we
sure.
really want to shift the future of work, of what a restaurant work means, or even what a server's work means, or even folks that are actually operating, you know, front back of house.
Well, let's dive into the Survey
Oh
robot
yeah.
here. Now, this is so interesting because, like I said, I was at the San Antonio Performance Food Service show. I came across this thing. It just stopped me in my tracks. And I'm like, how cool is that? I see it as a marketing hook. I see it as a labor saving device. I see it as something really interesting and unique for the customer experience. Let's talk about what it does and how it works.
Well, I'm really proud to say that the survey that you saw is the only robot to have now the NSF certification, to actually be able to deliver all of your food and uh, anything inside of a front of a house, or even moving into the back of the house of a restaurant. It's the only one in the nation to be able to actually, we can actually now safely say that. Um, but basically, what you have there in front of you is it's a robot, basically with it has a top tray, a middle tray, and a bus tub on the bottom. There are
I'll show
3D
it again while
cameras.
you're
Oh,
speaking.
there you
Go
go.
ahead.
You have 3D cameras basically in the robot. You've got a lidar on the very bottom, and that's used really primarily for, detecting obstacles, as well as location mapping when we go out and actually set it up. But really, it's a part of how the cameras on it is really kind of how it's able to see and detect whether it's a table, a child, or let's say you may have a purse, or you may have, I don't know, when you have a family, sometimes you'll have obviously the booster seats and things like that. So everything that we've been able to actually test and run in front of hundreds of thousands of real-time customers now, the robot itself is able to go. It's self-driving technology indoors, and so it's able to go from point to point, whether it's from an expediter station to a table, deliver your food for you. There's weight sensor on each and every single tray, and once food is taken off, it immediately returns back to an expediter station, or you can send it to multiple tables, and what we call is a patrol mode for that. So you can send it to, let's say, an actual station. A server may have 4 or 6 tables that they're monitoring, and send it out to a server, and then they get the last piece of the interaction, that kind of human touch that we're trying to bring back to hospitality, to actually allow for that, which is what servers really enjoy the most, is like that creative aspect of really engaging with customers and really bringing service back to what this is all about, which is hospitality. So, you know, we also have software that we've developed on for our robot that allows us to really check the health of a robot, whether it's in Missoula, Montana, or in Tokyo, Japan. So
Oh, remotely,
that in and of itself,
you can
remotely, we're
plug
able to
in.
troubleshoot, and we can actually
Wow.
help support that. So that has helped us quite a bit in order to be able to scale and grow and really put this. We've actually, most of our business to begin was in Japan and in Korea. And now it's really starting to get adoption, pretty big in the United States as well.
Walk us through the process one. Let's just say I own a restaurant and I just brought in Servy and we're going to use it for the very first time. Who programs it to go to tables? How does the orders interact with it? How many servers get involved, or back of house, front of house people? Just walk us through the process of it
Yeah.
actually delivering something to a guest.
The initial step is usually when deploying, is really one of our field team members basically comes out to map the physical area
Hmm.
of a site.
Yep.
Basically what that means is you kind of drive the robot around in order to really kind of go through the boundaries of the area where the robot will operate in.
Hmm.
The lidar that I mentioned earlier will scan the area while you manually drive the robot around. Think of it like, the best analogy I can give you is like when you were a kid and you learned how to color. You learn how to color in the lines, right?
Right. Right.
That's all
Yes.
you're doing. And so,
Yes.
I mean, a restaurant is it's a pretty simple process to set up, because usually restaurants are not huge. Now, we are operating in some very, very big venues, like restaurants inside of casinos and restaurants inside of sports arenas recently. We just recently started with the NBA and some other folks, but like, most restaurants are not like tens of thousands of square feet. They're, generally pretty easy to set up. You can set up a survey to be run that same morning, basically within an hour and a half. But um, the work that requires kind of interacting with staff is really, we'll try to find like either the on-site manager or staff to really try to address what points they want it to go to, whether it's to an actual table, or in certain cases, we have what's called dispatch stations. So it'll go to an actual dispatch station, deliver the food to that area, and then the server will take it, as I mentioned to you. But either will work, because naturally now, when it goes to a table, customers will actually just take it off of it. So as I mentioned earlier, once food is taken off of the robot, it actually will detect it and zero itself out and come back to the expediter station, because there are weight sensors on each level.
Maybe you mentioned this and I missed it. Is there any way that the robot detects the customer taking the correct order if it's going to multiple tables? Does it beep because it knows what order goes with which table, or am I getting ahead of myself?
We're going to actually be implementing that, because there are a few ways that it's being done now, where the actual ticket is actually put on each level, and so folks will be able to see that the food that's coming to their particular table is designated for that particular
I see.
table
Okay.
number, and or it's like, let's say it's a burger that's well done versus a burger that's medium, whatever. The ticket on the actual tray will actually tell the user who's getting what. But in other cases, what we've seen is usually the server will actually be in or around that area and provide that last piece of service as well. So
So there is a personal touch involved, plus the coolness of the robot.
absolutely,
That's
absolutely, and
great.
it also keeps, most importantly, it keeps that server in or around where the customers are. think of it like, in a casino floor, you have that
Hmm.
pit boss who actually is kind of constantly monitoring the floor. That's really what you want your servers to do.
Yes,
You don't need them going back and forth hundreds of times a day to the back of the house, because it really prevents understanding what a customer's needs are. And so that customer experience is what we're trying to get back to, is really kind of elevating that customer experience so that servers went out. Because believe it or not, uh, especially in our deployments, since in Florida, we really started a lot of deployments in South Florida in May, and we've seen tip incomes go up significantly, like
that's awesome.
25 or 30%, which is great because servers are really kind of much more
Yeah,
engaged.
that's great.
So in that sense, I think it's really been helpful. So if a server wins out, meaning the staff actually love it, obviously, it helps the owner really kind of get that increased kind of folks coming back. And, in the end, if a customer experience is elevated, you kind of hit all three marks. So that's what we're trying to do.
And that's where the tagline comes in: "Servy runs and you serve." I mean, that's great.
That's correct, yeah, and because, there are a lot of what we tried to think about back, 4 years ago is what can be automated. There's a lot of things in the back of the house that can be automated, whether it's preparation of food and or perhaps, dishwashing and things like that. Those things can all be automated to help, but in the front of the house, it's kind of that running back and forth. There's really it doesn't if you can kind of keep folks in the front of the house, it really will allow for a much more meaningful experience for folks to come back to you. And I think that's really what we're trying to help with this tool. So that's why we developed it.
All right, so do you have 2 or 3 different sizes of the Servy? I know there's a mini, right? One for drinks, and then there's the main Servy, and then there's, something for bus buckets as
That's
well?
right. Yeah.
Okay.
We've really tried to make it. We've designed it in a versatile way so that it can be used for beverage running, so it can be used for food running. In addition to that, imagine like very busy Friday night. You've got, let's say, many families coming through. So in order, you can actually call the robot to your location, clean off that table, get the party of the family of 4 or 5, literally, that kind of area cleaned very fast. Send the robot to the dishwashing station. You as a server don't have to do that. You don't have
Right.
to carry around 30, 40, 50 pounds
Yes.
of finished dishes. And then obviously you can go and actually attend to the new arrivals, the new guests, and actually get them seated, uh, turn that table quickly. So really, these are the types of things that we're really trying to help kind of implement so that it becomes a much more efficient operation, for the future of the restaurant industry and for the future of how folks will work in it.
Having family style restaurants myself for 2 decades, I learned a long time ago that the kids often determine where the family goes out to eat, and they wanna go to the fun place, and suddenly here's something very unique that the kids are gonna be all over, and they're gonna wanna go to this restaurant because they have a Servy, right? That's the hook part. I think that's
It's
beautiful.
yeah, it's very interesting because,
Yeah, that's awesome.
we started in the restaurant space. That's our bread and butter. So obviously we've been able to work with some very big names that everybody will know, but there's also, family entertainment concepts. As I mentioned to you earlier, we've started in some arenas lately, and, you've heard of the big family entertainment concepts like a Dave& and Buster's, or even like
Yes,
these
been
big,
to those. Mhm.
obviously in like a main event, that kind of thing. That's really, you've got significantly large walking distances and things like that. And we'll probably eventually be in movie theaters, because a lot of movie theaters now are actually changing to a different model where you actually go in. It's like you're sitting in a very nice, comfortable couch, and you get food kind of served out to you. But again, those are all opportunities that I think we'll go after, and we want to kind of be. There's a lot of different ways if you think about it. There's restaurants really all in so many different situations, in so many different areas that we want to helpfully help the staff with. So we're looking forward to what the future holds.
So I'm assuming there's a charging station and it takes a certain amount of time to recharge. Like, how long does a Servy operate on a charge, and how long does it take to recharge, and all those types of things?
Our current battery can last up to about 12 hours, and so that should be enough for a typical shift.
Yeah, for sure.
there are restaurants, as I mentioned to you, we had started initially deploying. The adoption in Japan has been really quite high. There are some restaurants that are actually open much longer hours. But what we try to do is, well, right now we just charge right into a wall. And so the charging time is to get fully charged is about 2 to 3 hours.
Hmm.
Usually, when it's fully charged, a 12-hour operating time frame is usually enough for most restaurants. But if it's needed for more than 12 hours, usually during a downtime, staff will actually charge it to kind of top it off, essentially. So very similar to kind of like anything else that you have, whether it's your phone or it's, if you happen to have a Tesla, maybe you're always kind of like trying to continue to do that, and everybody has to face that. So, we're working on some really interesting things that's going to be coming out hopefully next year, where we really want to make it seamless, where the robot will basically charge itself. So we'll go to a docking station, but we're trying to figure out how to do that wirelessly. So that's something that's to come, which should be pretty interesting.
Well, that's excellent. I think you've given us lots of information, not only about solutions to the labor crisis, but something really unique that you should take a look at in your restaurant. I think it's really cool. Why
Thank
don't
you.
you tell us your website URL so people can find the survey?
We are at www.bearrobotics, BEARROBOTICS.ai, because it's robotics and artificial intelligence coming to the restaurant industry. We can't wait to do as much as we can for the industry.
Well, thanks so much, Juan, for being with us. And thanks, operators, for tuning in to Cracking the Restaurant Labor Crunch. We'll see you in another installment. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Thank you, Juan.